The Israeli occupation military has released details from their review of the killing of 15 emergency workers in Gaza last month. The occupation military said there had been several professional failures, breaches of orders, and a failure to fully report the incident. The 15 paramedics and emergency responders shot dead on March the 23rd and buried in a shallow grave where their bodies were found a week later by officials from the United Nations and the Palestinian Red Crescent. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has directed the military to intensify operations against Hamas, saying the fight must continue until what he described as victory is achieved. His remarks follow Hamas's rejection of the latest Israeli proposal for a temporary ceasefire. Hamas instead reiterated its demand for a comprehensive agreement that would end the war in exchange for the release of detainees. The developments come as the conflict enters a new phase, with diplomatic efforts facing renewed setbacks. Hamas has announced that the fate of the Israeli-American detainee Idan Alexander remains unknown after one of the guards assigned to him was found dead. President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff told reporters at the White House in March that gaining the release of Alexander, believed to be the last living American detainee held by Hamas in Gaza, was a top priority. The release of Alexander was at the center of talks held between Hamas leaders and U.S. detainee negotiator Adam Bowler last month. Hamas released 58 detainees under a brief ceasefire that began on January the 19th. At least 12 Palestinians have been killed and several others wounded in a series of Israeli airstrikes across the Gaza Strip, targeting Gaza City, Khan Yunis, and Rafah. In Gaza City, 5 people were killed when Israeli warplanes struck El Nakhil Street in the El Tufa neighborhood. In southern Gaza, 2 civilians identified as Ismail Lakad and his son Ahmed were killed when their family home was hit in the El Manara neighborhood of Khan Yunis. A separate strike on the Kafsova area east of Rafah claimed the lives of 5 more people. Efforts to recover bodies from the rubble remain difficult as civil defense teams face intense shelling and widespread destruction. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, the UNRWA, has announced that it is currently operating 115 shelter centers across the Gaza Strip, hosting more than 90,000 displaced Palestinians. In a statement posted on X, UNRWA warned that the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Gaza continues to worsen amid ongoing Israeli bombardments and blockade that are preventing the entry of humanitarian aid and commercial supplies. The United Nations estimates that approximately 420,000 people have been newly displaced since the collapse of the ceasefire on March the 18th, further straining already overwhelmed humanitarian services. The UN World Food Programme has warned of a worsening crisis in Gaza, where nearly 2 million displaced people rely entirely on aid for basic food needs. The WFP raised alarm over an increasing danger to hundreds of thousands of Gaza's population. The program expressed grave concern over the sharp decline in food stocks, warning that the region is on the brink of a potential humanitarian catastrophe. The WFP emphasized that this critical situation is compounded by Israel's ongoing closure of the border crossings, which is preventing the delivery of vital food supplies to the besieged enclave. The United Nations Children's Fund UNICEF has warned that hospitals treating children and newborns in the Gaza Strip are operating under extremely dire conditions and lack essential medical equipment. In a post on its X account, UNICEF stated that the survival of children in Gaza now depends on a ceasefire, urgent delivery of humanitarian aid into the besieged territory. The appeal comes as part of growing international concern over the worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza, where ongoing Israeli airstrikes and siege have devastated infrastructure, displaced the majority of the population, and crippled the healthcare system. And dozens of protesters have clashed with police in a central Israeli community where Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was expected to visit. Demonstrators voiced their anger at his vow to continue the war with Hamas, demanding an end to the war and the release of the remaining 59 detainees held in Gaza. Tensions flared as protesters pushed against police barricades, with some attempting to breach a makeshift gate. The demonstrators carried signs and chanted slogans accusing Netanyahu of prolonging a war they believe has achieved nothing but destruction.